On this episode of UFC Inside the Octagon, we preview the UFC 231 main event between featherweight champion Max Holloway and Brian T-City Ortega. The Hawaiian's record-breaking win streak saw him finish 2017 as the undisputed 145-pound king. On December 8th, Holloway makes his long-awaited return as he aims to continue his reign with a second title defence against an undefeated challenger.
Brian Ortega, ladies and gentlemen.
T-City has been racking up records of his own by stopping every opponent on his way up the featherweight rankings. His most recent knockout of Frankie Edgar certified his position as the #1 contender and earned him his first shot at UFC Gold. Hello and welcome to UFC Inside the Octagon. John Gooden back with Dan Hardy for another deep dive into a pay-per-view main event. Today we're going to be talking about the big fight for the featherweight title between Max Holloway and Brian Ortega. It is going down this time, Dan. Let's talk Max first.
Okay.
He's had an interesting rise. Looked fantastic since that Conor fight. But 2018's been an absolute shocker for him.
Yeah.
Can he finish it off well?
Well, I mean, that is the question. And ultimately, I don't think that question's answered until A, he steps on the scales at championship weight, and B, performs in a championship fight. I mean, you know, we saw him take a last-minute fight at 55, and he was removed from that fight during the weight cut. That concerns me because I know it was short notice, but it was still 10 pounds over his weight class. And then the confusion going into the last bout where he was withdrawn. Maybe it's just a point of his body saying no more 45. I mean, he's still a young man, but he's been fighting in the UFC for a long time. He's had a lot of fights at 45. And he's, 26, 27? He's around that age where your body just grows all of a sudden. And I remember experiencing it. I've seen a lot of other fighters experience it. I think Darren Till's kind of in that situation as well. You know, 26, 27, you gain 5 pounds and you just can't lose that. And, you know, if he struggled to make 55 on a short notice fight, making 45, even with planning, might be difficult.
I'm just 28 and I'm still waiting for that expansion. But that's a story for another day. Right, let's get into the facts and the stats.
Still 26, still
it's
younger
crazy,
than his challenger, yeah.
I feel like he's been around forever.
I know. But, I mean, experience, he's had so many fights in the UFC, 15 victories in the UFC. I mean, he's a busy individual, but he's still young. People forget that. I
always think that Brian Ortega's one of the taller guys, but actually they're not physically that similar at all.
No, they're not. I mean, the reach is identical, but Brian Ortega being 3 inches short is interesting because when he fought Frankie Edgar, the first thing I thought in that fight was, my goodness, Brian Ortega's huge in comparison.
Yeah.
Frankie Edgar was former lightweight champion coming down. Argument that he could still go down another weight class when you see him next to these two guys. But I mean, I think these are going to match up sizably, fairly equally. I think Max is going to have a slight height advantage, but you know, you kind of think the way Max fights, he's got such a long stance and he leans so heavy on that lead leg. I don't think we're going to see a great deal of difference. It's really the grappling exchanges where we see the size difference, if there is one. The
rest of the board is just wow, isn't it?
I know. I mean, we could highlight all of them. This is an interesting one. Obviously, it's you know, he's finishing guys consistently, and I'm going to touch on this a bit later, but finishing guys in later rounds when he's losing the fight going into the later round, which I find interesting. Performance bonuses. You know, he's got the ability to rack up these bonuses. When you're fighting a guy like Max Holloway, you've got to think this is going to be a real barn burner because Max never backs up in fights. He likes to be aggressive and push forward. He's an active fighter. And then, you know, like I've just mentioned, the only person to finish Frankie Edgar, can't discount his striking power because we've seen it on demonstration against a guy that is notoriously able to take ridiculous punches from guys like Gray Maynard, you know. Yeah,
and Max's stats, he's the champion.
That's the one I'm looking at.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to circle back to it in a second, but 83% takedown defence is really interesting when you compare it to Brian Ortega's 14% takedown success.
Right.
14% successful in these takedowns. I mean, at a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, very high level, but...
With a lot of
14% of the time he's getting people to the floor against 83% takedown defence. That, for me, is where it gets quite difficult for Ortega in this fight if he doesn't start early. OK, well, let's stick with Brian Ortega's shit. OK. Because he's had a fantastic rise, unbeaten. What do you got for us? Well, first couple of fights in the UFC, I know one of these was a no contest, but I still want to look at the technical aspects of that bout. We knew immediately he was an excellent grappler. We saw that by the way that he climbed up Mike Del Toro here, clamped onto him, controlled him with the body triangle beautifully, and then was able to kind of let go with his arms and work independently, striking, working for the choke. But then this is what we need to talk about, is this squeeze that he's got. It's a black belt squeeze, as Eddie Bravo would say. It's something that you cultivate over many, many years of grappling. And when we saw that performance, we thought when he comes up against Thiago Tavares, he's going to struggle on the ground because Thiago Tavares is so strong. He's a veteran of the game. He's got a lot of experience. It's not what we saw. I mean, we saw Brian Ortega move around him on the ground fairly comfortably, opened up with a beautiful elbow from the bottom as well, from the bottom, you know, guard bottom, caught him with a very clean elbow. And you could just see the disorientation from Thiago Tavares from that point where he was kind of chasing to try and catch the fight back up. He felt like it was slipping away from him. And I think bad cuts do that to fighters sometimes. They see the blood, they panic a bit. And Brian Ortega's got a habit of opening people up, which does tend to leave people to, you know, it does tend to lead people to be a bit more aggressive, do things uncharacteristically, leave themselves exposed. And because he fights in such a relaxed, calm manner, like everything's in hand, oftentimes he sees opportunities that he wouldn't see if he was, you know, being too overly aggressive. Yeah. He allows the fight to come to him and then exploits his opponent's weaknesses. Yeah.
OK, well, let's switch it to the champion now. And we've looked at him many times here on Inside the Octagon, and the striking stands out for me. He's excellent everywhere. I guess you could say he really is master of that range control in the fight.
He's a mixed martial arts striker, and I think that this is where his strengths come into play in this fight. What you tend to find, particularly in the early rounds, he teases his opponents, he tests them. He uses very safe long-range weapons, like a few low kicks, a long jab. I mean, he does cover distance very well, and he does fight very long. But then once he starts feeling more comfortable, he'll start throwing a few more unorthodox techniques in. When he starts throwing the spinning attacks, then you know he's feeling more comfortable, more creative. When people start to freeze up and not react, I mean, Cole Miller backed all the way across the octagon there. When Cole Miller starts backing up, you know that he's not got answers because he doesn't know what's coming at him. He's being reactive, which allows Max Holloway to kind of mix things in. And this is something, I just want to touch on it briefly, because obviously you've got to think Max Holloway, he moves through ranges so well. But when you're moving towards Brian Ortega, you don't want to get too close to him because you can end up getting tied up and either dragged to the floor or he's going to climb up you and choke you out. So if you want to close distance but you don't want to grapple, this is the ideal takedown, which Max Holloway does so well because he steps behind people. Look, I mean, he's positioned his leg perfectly there. Cole Miller's still dealing with a striking combination as he pivots him over that and drops him. We saw him do it against Pettis a couple of times as well, and it can be quite embarrassing, especially because you trip them and then just release them to the floor. Like, they fall. It's quite dramatic. It's almost like a knockdown. But that then starts to force people to freeze up as well because you kind of don't know what, you kind of don't know what he's doing. He manages range so well that even when he's crashing forward, you're kind of freezing up a bit. You're not sure what's coming at you. When you're trying to throw strikes, they're falling short. I mean, look at this. Max Holloway's eyes are on Anthony Pettis here. Anthony Pettis throws a hop lead side kick, which, one of his favourite techniques. Extends it out there, but just look at this range management. Max Holloway doesn't even look at it. He drops back just out of range. I mean, that just misses his chest. It's quite incredible. And then he lands on that back foot, he plants it, and then he steps straight back in again. You can't get away with anything with Max Holloway. It's very difficult to predict what he's going to do, but at the same time, when you do something, you also don't know what's going to come back in return, which makes people quite tentative. Now, let me just pause it here. I know this is quite a crude way of doing this, but it's the best way of me explaining it. So, like, say if this is the striking range, right? So, at the moment, we're outside of kicking range. So I would say that probably kicking range is there. I would say boxing range is there. And then anything past that, this is where you're in the clinch. This is your dirty boxing range. Brian Ortega is very good from this kind of range. But anything past that is where Max Holloway excels because he's got those long-range kicks. Do you know what I mean? Anytime we've seen Brian Ortega throw kicks, he's either been caught or he's been countered, which not only tells me that it's not really a strong part of his game, right, but he's also not thrown with intention, which is leaving him exposed for someone like Max Holloway who will counter over the top. So if you think of the striking range broken down into 3 sections, kicking to punching to clinch work, I would say Max Holloway has more of that spectrum under control than Brian Ortega does. Now, obviously, that flips. The script is flipped when they hit the floor, which is where Brian Ortega comes into play. But we always start the fight standing. You've got to transition through that space in order to get your hands on him. That's what Max Holloway does so well. He manages that range so well. Cub Swanson just didn't really know what to do. He was stepping in high and then level changing, throwing body shots. He was mixing his kicks in beautifully. And Cub Swanson's a single punch knockout power kind of fighter. He waits for that opportunity. So when he sees you transition through range, he wants to throw punches. But if he's not sure what target you're aiming for, it's going to cause him to freeze up. I mean, this is beautiful. Let's just have a look at this from a different angle. So he's hitting there. As he's backing up, a lot of fighters here would flurry forward. They would rush forward. They can see his hurt to the body. They want to expose that weakness, so they're going to chase him down and throw a barrage of punches. But Max Holloway doesn't. Again, measures the distance well, uses the feint, sees the range, uses a perfectly placed kick. Now, it's knowing all of these tools that he's got in his toolkit that he can use. And I feel like there are so many more tools in his toolkit on the feet than there are with Brian Ortega. When it comes to closing the distance, though, I'm going to roll straight on because I'm in a bit of a Max Holloway mindset here. When Max does close distance, though, he's very good at disengaging the grappling range. He knows he's got a close distance. When he sees someone's hurt, he does want to push forward like that. But then he does find people level changing underneath him, whether they actually want to take the floor to the ground, to fight to the ground, or whether it's just out of panic. But when he starts these flurries, he needs to be able to manage that distance so he doesn't get tied up. The last thing he wants is for Brian Ortega to clamp onto him. But at the same time, if he hurts him, he doesn't want to let him off the hook. So managing that close range is going to be really important for Max Holloway. And then mixing up the striking targets as well. Breaking out of the clinch and striking something else that he might be able to catch Brian Ortega with, because, like I said, he doesn't step right out of range. He steps just out of range so he's safe, so he can step straight back in and counter you. It's range management at its best. I mean, this is probably why, you know, Max Holloway, the only person that beat Max Holloway in a long time has been Conor McGregor, another range management specialist. But I would say that Max Holloway learned a lot from that fight, and we've seen the result of that in his progressive fights. Even when he gets caught in a brawl like this, his intention's there to fight. He wants to fight, but he's still slipping and rolling. Watch this. He rolls under a punch here, beautiful. I mean, he's still conscious of what he's doing. He's not all anger and ego. He's not trying to get the big knockout. He's trying to throw as many strikes as possible, but keep his head out of the way as much as possible. He's very, very high-level striking defence as well as attack.
It's like he sees things in slow motion.
Yeah, a little bit.
And do you think it's a lot of times sparring in close quarters that gives him that level of comfort?
I think so. And I think a lot of it is down to the people that he's training with, how much he trusts his training partners.
Right.
Because
that's a good point.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
there's a very be that close if someone's going to keep massive haymakers.
No. And he's got good guys in the gym. I mean, you know, he's working with many of these high-level Hawaiian fighters, the likes of Yancy Medeiros, who's really going to be able to push him, being the bigger fighter.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be trading heavy blows in the gym. That also makes you kind of shell up a little bit in sparring, so you don't act as creatively as you might like to.
Yeah.
And as we've seen from Max Holloway's game, it is a very creative approach.
Yeah. Which
tells me that there's a lot of play sparring in the gym, which I'm a big fan of.
So Max Holloway being the champion, let's put it into levels. Level 5, the highest. Let's say Holloway's level 5. We've seen both of these guys evolve throughout their careers, 26, 27 years of age. And I've liked what I've seen from Ortega, but what level would you put him at right now?
I would say, because there's a deficit in his kicking game, I would say that he's probably at a 3. But then after the Frankie Edgar fight, I had to bump him up a point. I had to give him an extra point. There's a reason for it specifically. There was an adaptation in his game, which we saw in the Frankie Edgar fight, which we'd not seen before. But just general overall, with Brian Ortega's approach, it's much more of a traditional boxing method. I mean, his hands are down, but he's heavy on his lead leg, which is obviously not ideal for MMA if you've got someone who's got a good kicking game. So that is something that could leave him exposed. His timing, stopping and stepping straight back in is very good as well. His head movement's very good. You know, things that are going to be able to test Max Holloway and challenge him. You know, one thing that Max Holloway is very good at doing, obviously, is stepping slightly out of range, then jamming that back foot to step back in. We see Ortega do that all the time. And managing range and distance as well, understanding what he expects from his opponent. Now, just let's have a quick look at this. I'm just going to take this back a bit further. So Clay Guida was running away with this fight a little bit, purely based on his work rate. There was very much a feeling going into the last round that, Ortega, you've got to stop him here. You know, we don't want to leave this to the scorecards. We don't know how they're scoring it. Guida was, I mean, his work rate's so high that Ortega needed a statement in this fight. So he started to pressure him a little bit. Still not panicked, still not aggressive, not overly aggressive, but pressuring. And what he's seeing is as he backs Clay Guida up against the fence, Guida starts to do this to roll himself off the fence to get his head in a safe place. I mean, watch it here. He rolls off the fence there. So Brian Ortega's throwing at him and he's missing. Heads off to the side. He leans heavy on his lead leg. So Ortega perfectly timed that knee and lifted it up as Clay Guida was level changing onto it. Against Moicano, now this is the thing I want to point out a bit more, but just watch the way he approaches this fight. Again, Moicano was running away with this on the scorecards. He was outlanding him. But there was a bit of a desperation in Moicano because when it came to this third round, Ortega was starting to really put the pressure on him. And he uses this defense a lot. This is something I've seen him using throughout his entire career, but it's the first time in the Frankie Edgar fight that we saw him use it in a different way. Let me just have a look at this, see if I can find the perfect shot. Because as he uses it defensively, there it is, look. You see how he rolls a lot of punches off that lead arm. It's there's something very Nate Diaz about the way he moves sometimes. And that way that he defends strikes, and you see that, he brings that arm up. Like he parries stuff, yeah, he's covering that side of his chin.
That's almost a bit more elevated than a traditional boxer.
Exactly. I mean, there's benefits and drawbacks to this. Obviously, he's going to be exposed to the body a lot more in an MMA fight. Max Holloway with his knees and body kicks, he's going to be something that he has to keep in mind when he's doing this. But ultimately, look at the range that he's at here. When he's closing people down and he's in striking range, it's quite a good defence to use against boxing. But as we move on and we see him, use that a little more as a defensive tactic, when it goes to the Frankie Edgar fight, it became an offensive tactic. We're going to see it from a different angle, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. And I would say that Brian Ortega, much like Max Holloway, is not a big puncher. Neither of these guys are big punchers. They're volume punchers. That was a big punch, so people might be misled to believe that Ortega's a big puncher, but that was what started the whole thing. And you've got to think that all the way up into this fight was just a defensive tactic. He was throwing that elbow out there to deflect shots to protect his chin. But in the Frankie Edgar fight, it became a weapon.
It was a waste before.
It was a waste.
Why wasn't he doing this earlier?
Absolutely.
He wouldn't have to go to the third round then.
Right. But then you've got to think, you fight someone like Frankie Edgar, maybe he was aware that you can punch Frankie Edgar all day and he's not going to fall over.
Well, he wasn't stopped before, right?
Never been stopped before. This was the first time. So when you get caught with an elbow like that, that is a game-changing elbow. It's a game-changing elbow. You could see everything about Frankie Edgar changed in that moment. He wasn't even looking at this punch when it came. This is Frankie Edgar on autopilot, walking forward with a single necktie, trying to get into a dirty boxing range. That's what Frankie Edgar's subconscious would do if you switch the rest of his brain off, because that's the way he's been programmed. But in that moment, Brian Ortega had made him vulnerable with the elbow and then exposed him with the uppercut. And I do feel like when Max Holloway's closing that distance and he's throwing those long-range strikes, as we know, Max likes to throw big, wide punches. There's a small gap right in the middle of all those hooks where elbows sneak through. And that's where Holloway might be able to expose him in the close range.
I think that's so significant, winning in the first round against Frankie, just because he wasn't used to doing that. And then he does it against Frankie. And actually, when we looked at that fight on Inside the Octagon, you were kind of urging the team to come out and start a little faster. Because when you're fighting people with such high work rates, you're going to be down on the scorecards. It's an immense amount of pressure. So he's made these changes, which is fantastic.
Yeah, well, this is a talking point going a bit later in the show, perhaps. But starting fast is something that was important against Frankie Edgar because Frankie can run away with a fight.
Yeah.
If you don't start fast with Frankie Edgar, he's got 2-3 rounds in the bag before you realise you're into the championship rounds.
Yeah.
And then you're in trouble because you've got to stop him. And we know he's difficult to stop.
Yeah.
So Frankie, he kind of had to start fast against Frankie Edgar. He had to take the initiative. And I feel like the person that takes the initiative in this fight is the one that probably steals the first 2 rounds. OK, let's talk Gracie Jiu-Jitsu for a second. It's a 25-year anniversary, so it's only right. And we have the perfect guy, the Henna Gracie student, who's just got this incredible level of grappling for mixed martial arts. Of course, I'm referring to Brian Ortega, and the way he finishes fights with his jiu-jitsu, it's mouth-watering stuff. It's fabulous. Let's celebrate it. What I've done is I've picked out 3 clips that, well, 3 clips from fights that really show the depth and ability that we see on the ground. One thing that's worth mentioning is all these people that he's submitting here are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. He's not tangling with the Dan Hardys of the world. I mean, these are legit grapplers. Look at that transition from a front headlock position into a mount, but he sits straight into a triangle instead of going to mount and then progress into a triangle. He took that additional step out of there because he didn't need it. It's knowing how to progress slowly and maintain control of your opponent all the way through, or when they feel like they might be down the scorecards in this last round, they want a big statement, you shoot in, and then just so happens that Brian Ortega's like, I didn't plan on a guillotine in this fight, but if you're going to offer it me, I'll squeeze your neck off. And within seconds, he's tapping. I mean, Moicano must have known he was 2 rounds in the bag going into that one. Even if he didn't, then his corner team had done him a disservice. There was no real need for him to shoot there. And in the first round against the Cub Swanson fight, again, another Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, look at the panic on his face.
Saved by
like,
the bell.
think Discovery Channel, think you're seeing a human being wrapped up by a cobra or by a python. This is what, that's the panic on their face that you would see. That's feeling like your life slipping away from you in that moment. The bell saved him, but almost like an Undertaker had measured him for his coffin. He knew what he was going to catch him with the next time around. Wrap the head up. This was beautiful, the adjustment here. I'm going to show you another thing as well with the other angle. But he went to get rid of the arm in guillotine there. He went to go just on the headlock. Cub Swanson kept his arm in, so he just readjusted and got the squeeze. But watch this. Watch this. Kicks off the fence. Kicks off the fence, OK? Let's see if I can take this through slow. Jumps guard, OK? Gets his feet together once he's climbed up. So at this point here, he's assessing the grip that he's got on Cub Swanson's neck. Now, the likelihood is that he's got a chin strap and then he's grabbing onto his wrist because he lets go with his right arm, which most people in this situation wouldn't do because they're going to fall onto their back. But we talk about a black belt squeeze. To be able to let go and to readjust shows you how strong that grip is under the neck. And then he just readjusted, he kicks off the fence, and then beautiful work. It's such a compressive game no matter what position he's in. If he's on your back, if he's on your legs, if he's got a body lock, if he's around your neck, you're doomed pretty much. I mean, you can resist to a certain extent, but when someone's squeezing the life out of you, even if it doesn't get the submission, you've got to think you're going back to your corner after that fight, after that round. You've not been breathing consistently for the whole round because you've been defending chokes. So that is money in the bank for the later rounds, almost like attacking the body with body shots.
The confidence to be in top position where, and against a black belt, against Brandao, and not revert to ground and pound. I'm going to go to my back, which is a risk in mixed martial arts. And also, an arm in guillotine is way more difficult to finish in mixed martial arts, especially with everyone knowing about it, knowing the defences, and as you say, getting quick taps.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It is. And against black belts. I mean,
yeah,
you know.
for sure. Well, Max Holloway might not be a black belt, but he's shown really good levels in grappling, and whether it's standing on the deck, I mean, he's really very good. So I don't know how Ortega's going to successfully get his hands on it.
Well, there are a few facets to Max Holloway's game that we need to remember. One is that he's got great takedown defence, 83% success rate with his takedown defence, in comparison to someone who's got 14% success rate with his takedown. So that's going to give him confidence, knowing when to disengage, knowing when to build frames as well. This is great work, good hips, good footwork, get his feet away, but then settles for a minute, reads the situation. Against Andre Fili, look at this, just patient, good balance, builds frames, understands where he's at in the fight and what he needs to do to escape to not expose himself. And then this happens when he starts to put people under pressure. This is the Diaz model. You know, you pressure people until they shoot and then you submit them. Max Holloway's getting very good at attacking the necks. And for me, the guillotine is the leveler. That is the thing that levels. Anybody can get caught in a guillotine. Jeremy Horn got caught in a guillotine by Nate Marquardt. Alistair Overeem, guillotine, Vitor Belfort. Do you know what I mean? I'm picking guys that aren't notoriously grapplers against high-level grapplers. The guillotine's the leveler. So if Brian Ortega's hurt, he's under pressure, he's panicking, Max Holloway might attack that neck. And he's not going to do it in the first 2 rounds because Max wants to punch you in the face. He wants to beat you up because that's his game. But if you offer him this, he's going to take it, no doubt. And it's an additional narrative that Brian Ortega's got to keep in his mind, especially if he's struggling with takedowns, he's getting lit up on the feet and he's starting to reach for stuff. Max Holloway might catch him with something like that. I'm not counting it out because MMA is a leveler and Brian Ortega's got an excellent ground game. But if you've been punched in the face for 10 minutes, your legs are beaten up because you've been kicked to bits, you've been kneed in the ribs a couple of times, you've failed a few takedowns, put yourself in that mindset. You're panicking, you're reaching, you're scrambling, and then someone clamps and you see now how hard he rips that elbow up. I mean, like, Lamas tried to bail out of it and did a good job. Cub Swanson tried to bail out of it and struggled because he grabs it and he wrenches it up high and then steps over you so there's no way to go. Once he's got you in that position, it doesn't matter what belt you've got around your waist. There's no air in your lungs. You've got to tap. Yeah, I love that. When we were talking about that before, that whole damage. And because Max Holloway's an accumulation fighter, he's damaging you and that sort of progresses through the fights that, as you say, it takes away those defences a little bit. Let's look at X factors, as we like to, at the back end of analysis. And, well, we were referring to it earlier. Ortega's never out of the fight. No. And he wins late. It's crazy. He keeps that
calmness and that confidence throughout bell to bell.
Well, I mean, his last 6 fights, he's got 4 third-round finishes. And like I said before, a lot of the time these third-round finishes are coming when the fight was kind of getting away from him a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, Clay Guida was lighting him up, catching him with shots, beating him up, pressuring him, level changing, coming up to strike, level changing again. Ortega was kind of just reading him and just waiting, looking for that opportunity. But like I said, there's never a situation where you feel like he's panicked fighting. He's never trying to force the finish. He just lets it come to him. You know, Moicano, I mean, he busted Moicano's nose pretty good, but apart from that, Moicano was outstriking him in every range. But for some reason, you know, as the fight got on, Brian Ortega continues to march forward. He's not showing a great deal of damage. He's not particularly hurt. Moicano thought, wow, I'll chuck him on the floor. I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. How bad can this be? You know, I've been here 100 times before. And he jumped straight into a guillotine. You can even see when Moicano sits back on his heels, he was like, what was that about? Why did I do that? Because you can see the calculation in his brain all of a sudden pulls it apart and goes, well, I was running away with this fight and I gave him the opportunity to get the finish.
Yeah. And for those that aren't die-hard fans, Moicano, potential future contender for the championship?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
So
still ranked up in the top 5, 6.
Yeah, to get that win when they were both on the up is very special indeed. Well, someone else who can finish at any point in the fight is, of course, the champion. How he manages to maintain his energy, but not that. He goes through the gears, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He does. And it's very consistent in the way he goes through the gears. The pictures on this one aren't as important as the stats. I've pulled stats out for you on this one. I like statistical information. Striking success for Max Holloway improves as the fight goes on. Now, Pettis, 39%, 41%, 51%. And that's not because he's landing more strikes but throwing the same volume. He's also increasing his volume as well. I'll come back to that in a second, but it's consistent across his last 3 fights. 3 rounds of each fight. His pace picked up consistently. Here we go against Aldo, 37, 35, 65 in that 3rd round. Like, there's an immediate jump up, and as I said, it's because he's reading his opponent. I feel like his success rate in the first couple of rounds is so low because he's not necessarily throwing to land. He's throwing to test, he's throwing to read, he's throwing to see what reactions he gets so he can start to work his counters. But then when the 3rd round comes about and he feels like he's got that read, look at that. Look at that. 52% success rate in the 3rd round from 28 in the 1st, right? Now, I've not remembered all of the numbers of stats. You can check all these. These are on Fight Metric. That is based on, I believe, 25 strikes of 89. That is based on 108 strikes of 204. So not only is his success rate going up, but his work rate's going up as well. And you've got to think that, especially someone like Jose Aldo, who's been known to slow down a little bit, that can be quite intimidating when you're hitting a guy, he's not going away, his pace is continuing to improve, yours is dropping off. I mean, ultimately what we get from this is that they're both very strong in the 3rd round. So Max Holloway's strongest round just happens to be Brian Ortega's strongest round, which tells me 2 things. One, the guy that starts fastest will likely run away with those first 2 rounds. He'll get ahead on the scorecards, he might land something significant or, you know, at least create a scramble if it's Brian Ortega to, you know, to threaten Max Holloway. So the first 2 rounds are up for grabs. The other thing as well is we've not seen these guys compete in the championship rounds in the UFC. So we might get 4th and 5th round that are absolutely wild. Like, we might literally get a feeling out process for 10 minutes and then 15 minutes where they're trying to take each other out. The fact that they both get stronger as they go on tells me that these are both championship fighters, though. And the fact that they're not rushed in the early going tells me that they're confident, that they know the finish is going to come later in the fight. Yeah. And when you've got those additional 2 rounds on top of that 3rd round, I mean, that's just extra breathing room for guys like Max Holloway and Brian Ortega. Do you think intelligence, fight intelligence, plays a part as well? Because they're able to finish, they're learning in the moment, very present, and they're taking in all that information, processing it, and then executing. Yes. They approach the fight like martial artists and not like athletes. Yeah. If you're approaching the fight like an athlete, you want to win those rounds. You want to get those scores on the judges' cards. You want to make sure you're landing more strikes or more takedowns or whatever it is, because you're trying to win the contest. Yes. If you're there to fight, you're there to take the guy out. Yeah. So what these 2 guys are doing is they're spending the first 10 minutes studying, reading, assessing, testing guards, testing reactions. So when they see those opportunities without overexposing themselves, then they put their foot on the gas and they go for the kill. And that, for me, shows not only an intelligence, but a patience and a confidence to be patient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they all tie up, don't they?
Absolutely.
Let's play a bit of fantasy matchmaking then, because Brian Ortega's had a few conversations with the media. He's already got Khabib's name on his lips. And, of course, we knew about Max Holloway. He was willing to take the challenge as well.
Yeah.
So you said at the top end of the show, the future in the division, are they going to go up? What do you think?
Well, honestly, I do think Max Holloway is going to need to move up at some point. I mean, I know they're around a similar age, but Max Holloway's 5'11". You've got to think if he's gaining muscle now, it's going to be more difficult to get off his frame. I would say that Brian Ortega is still quite young in his UFC career. He seems to be making weight fairly comfortably. I mean, we've not seen any real drama around that. So it might be a case of him sticking around and fighting for or defending the belt if Max Holloway moves up. But then you've got to think Brian Ortega stepping up to fight Khabib. That's the kind of ground game that you need if you smashed up against the fence like against the wrestler. I would say that Brian Ortega is probably a better matchup for Khabib than Max Holloway is, because Holloway could be nullified like everybody else that fights Khabib, but Brian Ortega can pull things out of the bag on the floor that can catch anybody.
It's a bit like that Tony Ferguson argument, a little bit.
It's styles and fights, absolutely. And if Brian Ortega continues to improve his elbow game, that puts him right up there with Tony Ferguson as far as striking goes as well for Khabib.
Yeah, we know that Holloway's a great champion. What do you think about Ortega as a champion? Do you like the idea?
I do, absolutely. I think he's intelligent. I think he's mature. I think he understands the platform that he's got within mixed martial arts and what he can do to benefit people with that. He comes from a troubled background. He knows what he needed when he was a kid from people that he looked up to as heroes.
Yeah.
And he's now fulfilling that role for many other people. He's setting up foundations and this and that. You know,
needs to be commended for that.
Yeah, that's the kind of champion that we need. Not discounting Max Holloway at all.
No, for sure.
Brian Ortega absolutely has got that championship material and championship heart as well, not only inside but outside the octagon.
Sometimes you don't need to wear the gold to be a champion, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, both of these guys are of that ilk. OK, Dan, thank you very much. We are wrapped now for this one. What a fight it is dressing up to be. Keep the conversation going in the comment section below. Use the hashtag Inside the Octagon, the Twitter @UFC Europe. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the fights, and we'll see you next time.